500 years ago, a man sat in exile, stripped of power, watching his world crumble. His name was Niccolo Machiavelli. And in that darkness, he wrote something that would predict exactly how your mind gets hijacked every time you open your phone. You think social media is entertainment. You think it's connection. You think it's harmless scrolling. But Machiavelli would see it for what it really is: the most sophisticated system of psychological control ever created. Because every principle he wrote about manipulating the masses, every tactic he designed for maintaining power, every strategy he crafted for bending human nature to your will, it's all happening right now in your pocket, 24 hours a day. The same techniques that once toppled kingdoms now topple your attention span. The same methods that once controlled populations now control your purchasing decisions. The same psychological warfare that once decided the fate of nations now decides what you believe about reality itself. And here's what's terrifying. You're not just the target. You're the weapon. Every share, every like, every comment turns you into an agent of influence, spreading messages you don't even realize you're carrying. Machiavelli didn't just predict social media. He wrote the playbook that every platform, every influencer, every political campaign uses to reshape your thoughts without you ever knowing it happened. This isn't about technology. This is about power. And if you don't understand how the game is being played, you've already lost. Let me show you exactly how deep this goes. In 1513, Machiavelli penned The Prince, a manual so ruthless that his name became synonymous with manipulation itself. But here's what most people miss. He wasn't celebrating cruelty. He was exposing it. He was pulling back the curtain on how power actually works, not how we wish it worked. And every principle he documented is now being deployed against you through algorithms designed to be more addictive than slot machines. Machiavelli's first law: it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Sound familiar? Every social media platform operates on this exact principle. They don't want you to love them. They want you to fear missing out, fear of being left behind, fear of not knowing what everyone else knows, fear of being irrelevant. That little red notification dot isn't designed to make you happy. It's designed to make you panic. Instagram doesn't want you to feel beautiful. It wants you to fear being ugly. Twitter doesn't want you to feel informed. It wants you to fear being ignorant. TikTok doesn't want you to feel entertained. It wants you to fear being bored. And that fear keeps you scrolling, keeps you engaged, keeps you generating data that gets sold to the highest bidder. But fear alone isn't enough. Machiavelli knew that sustainable control requires something deeper: the illusion of choice. He wrote that the best way to control people is to make them believe they're free. And that's exactly what social media does. You think you're choosing what to watch, what to read, what to believe, but every choice is being shaped by algorithms that know you better than you know yourself. The feed isn't random. The recommendations aren't neutral. The trending topics aren't organic. Everything you see has been calculated, tested, and optimized to trigger specific responses in your brain. You're not browsing social media. You're being programmed by it. And here's where it gets darker. Machiavelli understood that the most effective manipulation happens when the target doesn't realize they're being manipulated. He called it the art of appearing virtuous while acting ruthlessly. Sound like any tech companies you know? They talk about connecting the world while dividing it. They promise to democratize information while creating echo chambers. They claim to fight misinformation while their algorithms amplify whatever generates the most engagement, regardless of truth. Mark Zuckerberg testifies before Congress about protecting democracy, while his platform harvests your psychological profile to sell to political campaigns. Jack Dorsey talks about free speech while shadow banning voices that don't align with certain narratives. Elon Musk promises transparency while manipulating what millions see based on his personal whims. They've perfected Machiavelli's greatest insight. The gap between what leaders say and what they do is where real power lives. But the individual manipulation is just the beginning. Machiavelli's true genius was understanding how to control entire populations without them realizing it. And social media has scaled this to a level he could never have imagined. Take the Cambridge Analytica scandal. 87 million Facebook profiles, harvested without consent, turned into psychological weapons, and deployed to influence elections across multiple countries. This wasn't a hack. This was Machiavellian statecraft, conducted through status updates and targeted ads. They didn't just steal your data. They stole your agency, your ability to form independent thoughts about the most important decisions in your life. And Cambridge Analytica wasn't an anomaly. It was a preview. Because the same surveillance capitalism that powered that operation is now the foundation of the entire digital economy. Every app you download, every website you visit, every search you make feeds into a system designed to predict and influence your behavior. You're not the customer. You're the product being sold to the real customers, the people who want to change how you think, feel, and act. Machiavelli wrote that men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see and few can feel. In other words, perception matters more than reality. And social media is the ultimate perception management machine. It doesn't matter what's actually happening in the world. What matters is what appears to be happening in your feed. Your reality is being curated by algorithms that prioritize engagement over truth, outrage over nuance, confirmation over challenge. You're not seeing the world as it is. You're seeing the world as it's been packaged to keep you scrolling. And the more you scroll, the more distorted your perception becomes, the more isolated you become from people who see things differently, the more convinced you become that your curated reality is the only reality. This is how echo chambers form, not by accident, but by design. Machiavelli understood that divided populations are easier to control than united ones. And social media has perfected the art of division. It sorts you into tribes based on your data profile, feeds you content that reinforces your existing beliefs, and makes sure you rarely encounter perspectives that might challenge your worldview. The algorithm doesn't want you to have a balanced understanding of complex issues. It wants you to have strong emotional reactions to simplified narratives, because strong emotions drive engagement, and engagement drives profit. Your anger, your fear, your outrage, these aren't bugs in the system. They're features. But here's what's truly Machiavellian about it. The platforms convince you that you're fighting for truth and justice, while they profit from your passion. You think you're a digital warrior, exposing corruption and fighting oppression. In reality, you're an unpaid content creator, generating engagement data for corporations that see your deepest convictions as market opportunities. Every political post you share, every cause you champion, every enemy you attack online, it all gets fed into the same machine that turns your authentic beliefs into advertising revenue. You're not just consuming propaganda, you're producing it. And the more convinced you are that you're fighting the good fight, the more valuable you become to the system you think you're fighting against. This is the genius of modern digital manipulation. It doesn't force you to believe anything. It creates conditions where you convince yourself. It doesn't tell you what to think. It shapes how you think. It doesn't control your choices. It controls the menu of choices you're allowed to see. And just like Machiavelli's prince, the platforms maintain their power, not through obvious coercion, but through the careful management of information, emotion, and social pressure. They've weaponized your need for belonging, your fear of isolation, your desire for validation, turning these basic human drives into tools of influence that operate below the level of conscious awareness. The question isn't whether you're being manipulated. The question is whether you'll recognize it in time to do something about it. The most chilling part isn't that this manipulation exists. It's how perfectly it works. Because Machiavelli knew something about human nature that every social media executive has memorized. People don't want freedom. They want the feeling of freedom while someone else makes the hard choices for them. You complain about the algorithm, but you keep using it. You say you hate how addictive these platforms are, but you check them hundreds of times a day. You claim you want authentic connection, but you choose digital validation over real conversation. The platforms didn't create these contradictions in your behavior. They simply learned to exploit them. And this is where Machiavelli's darkest insight comes into play. He wrote that people are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that the deceiver will never lack victims willing to be deceived. You're not being forced to scroll. You're choosing to. You're not being commanded to share that inflammatory post. You want to. The manipulation works because it aligns with your existing desires, making resistance feel like deprivation rather than liberation. Consider how effortlessly social media has rewired your reward system. A notification triggers the same neurochemical response as cocaine. A like activates the same pleasure centers as winning money. A viral post floods your brain with the same dopamine as falling in love. These aren't accidental similarities. They're engineered outcomes based on decades of research into addiction, persuasion, and behavioral control. But the individual addiction is just the foundation for something far more sinister. Machiavelli understood that controlling individual behavior was meaningless unless you could also control collective, and social media has cracked the code on mass psychological manipulation in ways that would make any Renaissance prince weep with envy. Watch how quickly a trending topic can shift public opinion on complex issues. Watch how a single viral video can destroy someone's reputation permanently. Watch how manufactured outrage can mobilize millions of people to take action based on incomplete or deliberately distorted information. This isn't organic social movement. This is orchestrated influence campaign masquerading as grassroots activism. The platforms have learned to weaponize your empathy, your sense of justice, your desire to be on the right side of history. They feed you carefully curated stories designed to trigger your moral emotions, then channel that emotional energy toward predetermined outcomes. You think you're responding to injustice. You're actually responding to psychological manipulation designed to make you feel powerful while making you more predictable. And here's where it gets truly Machiavellian. The same techniques being used to sell you products are being used to sell you political candidates, social movements, and entire worldviews. The line between marketing and propaganda has completely disappeared. Your data profile doesn't just predict what you'll buy. It predicts how you'll vote, what causes you'll support, which enemies you'll hate, and how intensely you'll feel about all of it. Political campaigns no longer try to win over undecided voters with better arguments. They use psychological profiling to identify your specific vulnerabilities, then craft messages designed to exploit those vulnerabilities while making you feel like you came to your conclusions independently. Your political beliefs aren't evolving through reasoned consideration of evidence. They're being shaped by algorithms that know exactly which emotional buttons to push to get the response they want. This is why political discourse has become so toxic and polarized. The platforms don't reward nuance, compromise, or mutual understanding. They reward outrage, certainty, and tribal loyalty because those emotions drive the most engagement. The algorithm doesn't care if democracy survives. It cares if you keep clicking. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this digital manipulation is how it's created an entire generation that mistakes information consumption for knowledge, online activism for real impact, and digital connections for genuine relationships. You feel informed because you read headlines. You feel engaged because you liked posts. You feel connected because you have followers. Meanwhile, your attention span shrinks. Your ability to focus on complex problems diminishes, and your capacity for deep, sustained thought atrophies. You're not becoming smarter or more informed. You're becoming more reactive, more impulsive, and more dependent on external validation to feel worthwhile. The platforms have successfully convinced you that constant stimulation equals productivity, that being busy online equals being effective in reality. Machiavelli wrote that there is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. And that's exactly what social media has achieved. It has introduced a new order where your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are treated as raw materials to be harvested, processed, and sold to the highest bidder. This new order doesn't announce itself with fanfare or force. It seduces you with convenience, entertainment, and the promise of connection. It makes you feel like you're in control while systematically removing your agency. It convinces you that you're more informed than ever, while actually making you more susceptible to manipulation than any generation in human history. The genius of this system is that it scales infinitely. Every new user becomes both a target and a weapon. Every piece of content you create feeds the machine that's designed to influence others. Every interaction you have generates data that makes the system more effective at predicting and controlling human behavior. You're not just being manipulated, you're helping to build the machine that manipulates everyone else. And just like Machiavelli's prince, the platforms maintain their power through careful balance. They give you just enough freedom to feel autonomous while maintaining ultimate control over your information environment. They allow just enough diversity of opinion to feel open-minded while ensuring that diversity falls within acceptable parameters. They permit just enough criticism of their power to seem transparent while making sure that criticism never threatens their fundamental business model. This is the final evolution of Machiavellian statecraft, not the crude authoritarianism of obvious dictators, but the subtle manipulation of apparent choice. Not the obvious control of what you can say, but the invisible influence over what you want to say. Not the prohibition of certain thoughts, but the engineering of conditions where those thoughts simply don't occur to you. You're living inside the most sophisticated system of social control ever devised, and it works so well that you defend it, promote it, and can't imagine living without it. That's not an accident. That's the masterpiece Machiavelli could only dream of creating. The question is, what happens when you realize you're living inside the machine? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every notification becomes a manipulation attempt. Every trending topic becomes a psychological operation. Every recommendation becomes evidence of how thoroughly your behavior has been mapped, predicted, and monetized. The comfortable illusion shatters into 1,000 pieces, leaving you staring at the brutal machinery underneath. But here's the trap Machiavelli would have anticipated. Knowledge alone isn't power. Understanding the system doesn't automatically free you from it, because the system was designed by people who assumed you'd eventually figure it out. They built in countermeasures for your awareness, your resistance, your attempts to escape. You delete the apps, but you miss the dopamine hits. You turn off notifications, but you feel disconnected from your social circles. You try to go offline, but modern life requires digital participation. The system doesn't need to force you back. It just needs to make alternatives feel impossible, impractical, or unbearably lonely. This is why Machiavelli emphasized that successful control must feel voluntary. The most effective chains are the ones you put on yourself. And social media has perfected this art. It convinces you that leaving means losing access to important information, meaningful relationships, and economic opportunities. It makes resistance feel like self-punishment rather than self-liberation. The platforms have learned something that would have impressed even Machiavelli. They've discovered how to make their victims complicit in their own manipulation, not just through passive consumption, but through active participation. Every time you share content, you're doing their marketing for free. Every time you engage with an algorithm, you're training it to be more effective. Every time you create content, you're feeding the machine that turns human attention into corporate profit. You've become both the product being sold and the salesperson doing the selling. You're simultaneously the target of manipulation and the weapon used to manipulate others. This isn't just exploitation. It's a form of psychological conscription where your own thoughts and relationships become tools in a system designed to benefit everyone except you. But Machiavelli understood something else that offers hope. He knew that all systems of control contain the seeds of their own destruction. The same technologies that enable unprecedented manipulation also enable unprecedented organization. The same platforms that divide us also connect us. The same algorithms that control information flow can be understood, anticipated, and potentially subverted. The key is recognizing that this isn't a technological problem requiring a technological solution. It's a human problem requiring human wisdom. Machiavelli didn't defeat his enemies with better weapons. He defeated them with better understanding of how power actually works. So here's what he would tell you if he were alive today. Stop expecting the platforms to regulate themselves. Stop believing that better algorithms will solve algorithmic manipulation. Stop waiting for politicians to save you from systems that politicians themselves don't understand. Start treating your attention like the valuable resource it is. Start questioning not just what you're seeing, but why you're seeing it. Start building real relationships that exist outside digital spaces. Start developing skills that don't depend on technological mediation. Start creating value that can't be monetized by surveillance capitalism. The war for your mind isn't happening in some distant future. It's happening right now in this moment as you decide what to do with this information. You can close this video and immediately check your notifications, proving that awareness changes nothing. Or you can recognize that understanding Machiavelli's principles is only the first step toward reclaiming your psychological sovereignty. Because 500 years ago, a man in exile wrote a book that predicted exactly how your mind would be captured, controlled, and commodified. He couldn't have imagined the scale of the system that would emerge, but he understood the human nature that makes such systems possible. The question isn't whether you can escape the machine. The question is whether you'll choose to remain conscious while inside it. And that choice, moment by moment, decision by decision, is where whatever freedom you have left still lives. The prince may have won the battle for your attention, but the war for your soul is still being fought.